We are live. Hello, folks. Let's see. Okay. Hi, my name's Dan Brown, and I co-chair the Acquisition, Restoration, and Emerging Issues Committee with my co-chair here, Russ Holfitch. And we want to remind everyone this virtual meeting is being streamed live over OWeb's YouTube channel and also recorded. For those on the Zoom meeting, we discourage using the chat feature since it's not visible for our YouTube audience. The meeting materials, as usual, can be found in the Board and Committee section of the OWeb website. And the committee materials are towards the bottom of the page where viewers can click on the committee and access the materials, as well as any past recordings. Before we get started, we'd like to ask everybody to introduce themselves, and I will facilitate that by calling on folks. So how about starting with you, Russ?
Okay, Russ Hoflick, struggling here today with connectivity issues. Apparently, there's a storm that I don't know of here on the Oregon coast, and so I'm glad, Dan, that you're leading us through it. Happy to be here today, though, and look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
All right, Bruce, you're on mute, Bruce.
Good, I stuttered anyway. I'm Bruce Buckmaster from Astoria, Oregon. I'm a member at large of the board, and this will be my final committee meeting.
As a voting member, the public is always welcome, Bruce.
There you go. Mark?
Mark Webb, Grant County Environmental Quality Commission Liaison. I forget what I am.
And we got Kelly on today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kelly Coates. I am the tribal representative on the OWeb board. I'm coming to you from Talent, Oregon today, and for my day job, I'm the Director of Natural Resources for the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians.
All right, thanks, Kelly. And I think that's it for board members, so we'll jump over to OWeb folks. Sarah? You're on mute.
I tried to unmute and then I hovered over the rock thing and the news feed came up and I couldn't see anything. It was very complex and I couldn't get it to go away. Sarah O'Brien, Executive Director of OWeb. Russ, if the lenticular cloud over Mount Hood today was any indication, it's going to rain a lot and I'm sure you guys will get it first. So you let me know.
All right, there you go. Renee?
Good afternoon, everyone. Renee Davis, Acquisitions and Special Programs Manager at OWeb.
Miriam?
Miriam Forney, Land Acquisition Coordinator.
And Nicole?
Hello, everyone. Nicole Bettinardi. I am OWeb's board liaison and exec assistant coming from Salem.
Okay, and then I see Diane here today.
Thanks, Dan. Diane Lloyd, Oregon DOJ, Contact Counsel to OWeb.
All right. And it looks like we have a couple of other folks who are maybe here for public comment. Is that right? Carson and Kevin?
It's Carson.
Carson, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So with that, we'll just remind folks what we have on the agenda today is public comment period. We're gonna hear from Renee and Sarah on closing the loop. And then this is a special kind of meeting added to our meetings just to, I mean, we've been receiving so much information and we thought we needed some more time to just have some dialogue about what we've observed so far. So we got a lot of time for that. And then we're going to tee up the December ARE meeting, and then we'll be wrapping up this meeting. So if there are not any questions about the agenda, I think we'll roll with public comment. And I think the way we're going to do that is by asking, first acknowledging that we did receive a written comment from Joe Foucault, Executive Director of Oregon Coalition of Oregon Land Trust. And on this call, would like to ask folks interested in providing verbal comments to use the raise hand feature. And I'm going to ask Nicole if she can help us manage the 3-minute time limit for those public comments. So anybody providing public comments? I'm not seeing any hands.
Carson has her hand up.
Oh, thanks.
Use my real hand.
There it is. Okay.
Thank you. Co-chairs Brown and hopefully members of the committee, I hope you're doing well today. I just wanted to jump in and quickly just thank you all for your commitment to these conversations and hosting a second meeting to kind of debrief what you heard earlier in September. We hope that the panel that we put together and the case studies we presented were helpful to highlight some of the issues our members have encountered with this program and the conservation easement requirement. And we really appreciate the time and consideration this committee and OWEB staff have given to this discussion, and grateful for the time to debrief today and discuss more details or hear more details. I know you guys have a lot to get through today, and I'm not going to go through all of my comments, but I just wanted to jump on here and refer you all to our submitted written comments where we attempted to kind of outline some solutions from our land trust community for building a bold and innovative program. These are ongoing discussions, and we look forward to continued partnership and engagement. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Carson, I just would like to say thank you for the ongoing work of the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts and helping us understand the depth of the issues that are out there and your constructive approach to helping us modernize this process.
Okay, Nicole, I'm not seeing any other hands. Are you?
I'm not. Kevin, I'm just going to call on you. Are you interested in providing public comment at this time?
No, I'm just kind of hanging out, listening to what's all going on. Hoping for a grant project to come up and it will involve you.
Got you.
All right, thanks. Not to put you on the spot. All right, Dan, I'll hand it back to you.
All right. Well, with that, we will just jump into the agenda and hand it over to Sarah and Renee for the for queuing up the closing of the loop discussion. And then we'll spend more time on the committee dialogue.
Closing the loop feels like a high bar. We've been discussing so much and we have so much still to discuss. I wish I'd framed that differently because it sounds very, very challenging. We have some slides to pull up in a second. As Dan said, we're just going to provide a little bit of additional background when we looked through committee member questions. And just thinking about the co-chair's request to reconvene this mostly for board member discussion today. We want to be brief, but we want to give, circle back on some foundational information that we think might be helpful for your ongoing conversations. But we do really want to leave the vast majority of the time for open discussion among board members today. We have some discussion prompts, but you guys asked for this time, so it's your time, and we'll let you take it where you want to take it. I do want to take a moment to celebrate, just before I pull up the slides here, that I don't think we've had a chance to share with this committee that in the current land acquisitions grant cycle, which closed to applications fairly recently, we had 9 applications, which is more applications than we've had in a long time. And we're really excited about that. And I just want to share kudos from all of us with Renee and Miriam, who have handled that volume by putting together a really collaborative team approach and handling that volume of applications in the face of some of the immediate and long-term program changes we're wrestling with here. It's a lot, and they've taken a really collaborative and positive approach to this. So I just want to thank and congratulate you guys for the work you're doing there. It's really important. And it's exciting. 9 is a lot. 9 is more than we've had in quite some time. And there's a lot behind each of those. So we're excited to dig into that later this next year. Renee, I'll pull up slides.
Sounds great.
And feel free to start talking while I Try to get all my papers straight here, my windows straight.
Yeah, so I think, Sarah, we can move relatively quickly through the first few, since the intent with today is really just hitting on a couple key clarifications and updates for the committee, but protecting most of the space for all of you to digest what has been a lot of information coming at you on really important topics. And although we focused on conservation easements in September, I think that there were some of those subsequent topics like future conditions, significant habitat, other uses, risk tolerance that are already weaving through the discussion. So we'll look forward to hearing your feedback today. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. All right, so in terms of a few pieces of foundational information and clarifications, again, from some of the questions that you all shared, we did want to take a moment to just, I think this is primarily in the clarification category. So there were some questions about the possible project types per the Constitution, what we allow in terms of applications coming into the land acquisition grant program. So just wanted to get clear that in Constitution and statute, there are references to multiple project types, including fee interests, conservation easements, and leases. So then for the purposes of implementation of the OWEB land acquisition grant program as described in Oregon administrative rules, we've narrowed that down to fee projects and conservation easements as the types of projects that applicants can propose to the agency and for which they can request funding. So leases are currently not part of the project types that can come in as currently described in administrative rules. So just wanted to clarify that piece. Then moving to the second topic, and I think this understandably can be confusing, is we do, as we talked about during the September committee meeting, and we've talked about even prior to that, we do have a title restriction requirement in statute 541960, and that tells the agency that you, OWEB, will hold some type of title restriction on properties that are purchased with OWEB funding to ensure that the uses of those properties through time adhere to the constitutional intent of Measure 76 funding. So in that case, the title restriction that has been the agency's choice thus far through the years has been a conservation easement. So that is what we use if someone brings to us a fee project, we will hold a conservation easement on that. And that is to meet the requirement of the title restriction statute. That statute did not say, OWEB, thou shalt use a conservation easement. I want to be clear on that. We have chosen to, for the reasons that we've talked about previously with the committee and Diane's talked with you all about, we've chosen to use a conservation easement because that provides the most assurance of being able to withstand legal challenge, given that, and I'll move down to number 3 on this list, there is pre-existing separate authorization for conservation easements in Oregon revised statutes. That's entirely separate from OWEB statute specifically. That is just the state chose to recognize conservation easements as a tool that can be utilized, and thus far it has been successful in running with the land and withstanding legal challenge. So I just wanted, there's kind of this jumble of how we reference easements and use of easements in these different contexts. And I just wanted to make sure that we provided some clarity on that. There also, in a few instances, were questions about the parks and recreation, the parks and natural resources mix or combination within measures 66 and 76. So just wanted to acknowledge that within that 15% allocation under the Constitution, that 15% bucket that happened under 66 and 76 for parks and natural resources, those are then split into separate buckets of 7.5% each, with specific intents around the parks pieces of the funding and specific intents around the natural resources pieces of the funding. So I mentioned that just so in the event that there's any kind of confusion about it's a single bucket, those are separated out, and we administer you all with the funding decision making on the 7.5% the funding that then is parsed again for grant funding between grants and operations. So just wanted to provide those clarifications. And then we did just put the pyramid schematic that Diane used with the full board, I think first back in July of 2024, to just help give a sense of that kind of tiering of from constitution, statute to administrative rule to any policies that are set, and then getting down into things like program level procedures, guidance, program materials, and then ultimately culminating in a grant agreement that includes terms and conditions. So Sarah, anything else you want to add on these clarifications?
Yes, but it doesn't fit well on the slide, is why I'm hesitating. As you're talking through this, Renee, and we talked about this a ton in advance, and I just kind of is circling back in my head. I do just want to remind folks there was a fair amount of content in the questions from committee members that was it seemed to me to be assuming that accredited land trusts might be our primary or sole grantee. And so I just want to remind folks as we're going through our conversations, we don't, that's a totally valid route for us to pursue in terms of the presentation we heard last time. I think it was on land trust accreditation and the risk, assessment and management, the benefit that provides. As we start thinking about larger scale program improvements, we need to remember that we have a broad diversity of potential and actual program applicants in this program. So it can include non-accredited land trusts, it can include nonprofits that are not land trusts, it can include municipal governments, and it certainly can include tribal governments. So just totally valid topic of conversation, but as we're working our way through these ideas, I do want to remind folks that this is a diverse community of folks that apply for and receive these grants, and we want to be thinking of a lot of different organizational institutional types as we're thinking about potential program and policy changes. I saw Mark Webb unmute there, and I'm curious whether there might be a question. There he goes.
Yeah, so I appreciate that there are different entities that can apply. How has that fallen out over the years? I mean, have you had very many entities other than Land Trust submit applications for land acquisitions?
We have, Mark, and I can make a rough guesstimate of probably, and Miriam, feel free to chime in and correct me, I would guess maybe probably 20% potentially of our applicants, if we look at the full span since back to 97, I think was the first, 98, that was the first grant that was awarded for land acquisitions, have fallen into that non-LTA accredited land trust category. I would venture a guess. So we've had counties, we've had cities, we've had tribes, we've had other nonprofits, as Sarah mentioned, that are not accredited land trusts who've come into the program.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
That would have been my guesstimate too, but I know less about it. So, okay, Renee, should we go to your next slide here?
Yep, that sounds great. Okay, in terms of updates, and Sarah, feel free to chime in at any point. So we really appreciated the feedback in September from the case studies that Colt and Colt members organized. So Sarah and I will be doing some individual follow-ups on those. I think it would be good to break down, and some of you did even ask about that at the September meeting, just kind of understanding kind of what went wrong, what went well, and kind of the different perspectives that we might have on that. So we'll be doing follow-up with the folks who provided that feedback on the various case studies. Again, super helpful. We intend, and this is glancing a little bit forward in the agenda, but we have been doing some outreach in preparation for an anticipated tribal panel at the December ARE meeting. Certainly, I think that we'll hear some things about conservation easements in that panel, but I would venture a guess that the topics addressed will be broader than that, including things like significant habitat and other uses, including but not limited to cultural uses. So we've been prepping for that. Russ, do you want to ask a question now, or you want to hold it until we get through the list? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. I have a question at this point. So there were a number of really good cases brought in September, and I guess how we frame the interaction with those who brought those cases to us, I would like to specifically understand what specific modernization actions would help us ensure that the projects that they felt failed would actually, if in further review, would move forward. What would change? So specifically getting to that very tangible element of, in a modernization process, what do we have to change in our approach, policy, or rule to be able to advance projects into the future?
Great, thanks for that, Russ.
Okay.
So then also wanted to flag under number 3, Sarah and I have initiated outreach to a broader audience. This goes at some level to what Sarah mentioned about there are other entities that are eligible applicants to the program. So for example, I think it's 2 weeks from today, in fact, we're going to be meeting with member counties with the Association of Oregon Counties to talk with them about the land acquisition modernization process, and may have be doing some other outreach to statewide organizations that represent some of these other interests. In addition, so that's more at the programmatic level. In addition, with having 9 applications come in for this current land acquisition grant cycle, 7 of those are fee projects. And so for any proposed fee projects as part of our potential for holding a conservation easement, if those are funded, we have a requirement to hold a public hearing. So we'll be doing public hearings for 7 projects around the state, and that's always a great way to get input about land acquisition projects and the overall program that we offer in terms of grants for land acquisition. We're doing some research into a few examples of very early in the program use of other types of instruments beyond conservation easements. There aren't many examples of those, but looking into a few of those just to get a better handle on some of the risks and benefits, pros and cons of those other instruments in practice. And then we did want to just flag for you, last meeting, we did not get to the matrix, that spreadsheet of potential title restriction alternatives. And we have a but, ... We are not intending to dig into that at this point, because I think both Sarah and I heard loud and clear from Dan and Russ. It would be really nice for all of you to have time to digest what you've heard thus far. I think us talking at you is not the best use of the time. So just wanted, though, to remind you, we didn't get to that piece of the meeting materials from September. And I think, Sarah, that may be, yeah, okay. Yeah, Bruce, go ahead.
Bruce has a question, yeah.
Thanks, Renee. Renee, I've been operating under the assumption that conservation easement was pretty much a binary, either have one or you don't have one. And I have a question whether there are any, do we have any options to amend requirements within conservation easement as it's currently used by OWEB to make it more to update it there? I mean, we looked at other, I know we're looking at other instruments, but potentially can there be fixes or changes to conservation easements as currently used by OWEB?
Yes, there can be. And so we currently have, you could consider it, we call it an example conservation easement. You could call it a conservation easement template that we publish when we open the grant cycle. And it outlines this is the type of content, terms and conditions that you should expect if we're engaging in an easement for a project. But certainly we could discuss, and we could even sit with this committee and walk through the content of that example conservation easement to talk through why some of those particular terms or conditions are included, where you think there might be some space for changing, updating, deleting. So that absolutely is something we could do. I would want to, and I appreciate you being here, Diane. I think part of the key is just in that process determining, like, where are those pieces that we would hit just that basic legal sufficiency bar in terms of an active public document that's defensible. But that's something we absolutely could do with the committee.
I see a number of hands up, and two of them are the
Yep.
co-chairs. So this seems like a good time to mention that I volunteered to direct traffic for the conversation. I think we decided this while you were out of town, actually, Dan, but
Okay.
so that the co-chairs can really participate fully in the committee members' conversation. I had some little question prompts. As you guys start to talk, I'll pull those out of the slideshow and bring them out. Well, we'll either bring them over to the chat or not. I'll have to think about that. But just I pulled down the slides so we can see each other's face. But I do have some little discussion prompts that we can talk through if those are helpful. But we can also just, you guys can start talking. Dan?
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say to my fellow committee members here from the board that I personally felt like I was a little overwhelmed, and of course it doesn't take much to overwhelm my little pea brain here. And I had questions that I didn't get to ask during our last meeting, and so I hope that I'm glad to see you all here, and I'm hoping that this is beneficial for all of you as much as it's going to be beneficial for me. And Russ also shared that he had quite a lot of questions, and I know that some of those questions have been kind of collected, and I didn't know if we wanted to sort of run through those or if we just want to sort of.
You know, Dan, we looked at them and it was a lot, and I felt like,
Yeah.
boy, we'll get to the first one or two, and then
Yeah.
that'll
Okay.
probably be about it.
Well-
So if you guys have that list handy and want to point us to certain questions, we just kind of organized them by category so they were a little easier for members to look at.
Gotcha.
We can pull that up. We can talk through them in chunks. We can do what you want, and maybe we can keep going through Russ and Mark's questions or comments here and see whether it's wise to go back to
Well,
the prompts or
do-
not.
Yeah, I do have one. That was
That was your
prefaced to-
preliminary
to my-
question.
to
Now you
my
have a real question. Okay.
So Renee, in that little second slide there that you were just sort of running through, you seem to draw a very strong distinction between OWEB's choice to use CEs and a very separate piece of legislation that state legislators put together that was very bullish on the use of CEs. And during the last meeting, I felt like those were very connected. And so it's interesting to hear you kind of say, oh, well, I almost felt like you were saying that you didn't feel restricted at all by that other piece of legislation. And that's kind of surprising to me, because I felt like the Oregon legislatures, even though they didn't necessarily come right out and say it, because they passed that legislation the way they did with categorical, with CEs as like they seem to be saying, we think the state of Oregon should be using this as the preferred tool. And I'm just more curious about OWEB's thinking around that, and maybe Diane has something to say about that as well.
So thanks for that flag, Dan. In my mind, it's more the offset timing. If memory holds, I think the conservation easement discussions in the legislature were around like 1975 vintage, something like that. And ORS 541-960, I think, was maybe around 99, 2000 in that time frame. So 98, 99, 2000. So I think one is just establishing that was conservation easements were taken up by the legislature much earlier than even the existence of this agency. And so I think obviously what you describe makes them a very clearly identified tool that does have some protections, as we've talked about. And that the existence of that legislation does not force the agency, does not say thou shalt use this. We have decided, because of the durability assurances that we've talked about, that was the instrument of choice. But I think I'll stop there and let our legal expert chime in on anything that she wants to share.
Well, sure, I see where that confusion is, Dan. So I'm gonna try to help and not confuse it anymore. So I think what you're referring to is like the conservation easement enabling statute, and that's the earlier statute that Renee described, and that's just that for conservation easements to be a thing in Oregon, the Oregon legislature had to enable their use. And so it does, and that gives them a sort of favored status in that it allows them to run with the land and do all these things that if the legislature had not done that. But that's not directive to OWEB at all. It is just a general statute that allows, it's the same statute that allows land trusts to, use a conservation easement that's, and have it work under Oregon law. So that's just, a broad statute. And I think it's been raised a number of times just to explain why conservation easements maybe have been historically favored, because they're a known quantity because they're provided for by the legislature. Then separately, we have the statute that is a actual directive to OWEB that says if you're going to purchase land, you have to record a title restriction on it that does certain things. And so OWEB has decided historically to accomplish the requirements of that statute by using a conservation easement. So does that help and get to where we need to be on explaining that difference?
Yeah. I just, and again, I kind of missed that, but I think I would guess from hearing your discussions earlier, the fact that earlier statute exists and provides that clarity around CEs being a very effective tool for trying to do what you're accomplishing, then, I mean, it seems like that's why we're using CEs, right?
Yeah, Dan, it's something that comes up a lot in a comparison between Oregon and Washington programs. So our Washington side equivalent, RCO, has a broader set of title restriction instruments that they use. And also they have really different statute there. They have statute that outlines that a number of these different kinds of instruments do run with the land. And so it's a weird situation. It's just, I'm not surprised folks missed it because it's really dang hard to explain. It doesn't live in our statute, but our stuff refers to it. And in Oregon, that's conservation easements. And in Washington, it's a broader set of instruments that have that sort of underlying reliability of having been specifically outlined as having that. I did want to mention, because this is something that I think Russ, I feel like a while back you might have mentioned or asked about this, or maybe it came up in a separate question in the written questions. We did do a little digging into legislative history around 541-960. And it seemed like the concerns during that period were kind of twofold. First, there was a desire to ensure, and it went through a couple of different iterations, I should say, over time. It used to live somewhere else in statute. It was amended, it moved, so on and so forth. One was to make sure that when we make this kind of investment, understanding that we're investing in the conservation purpose for perpetuity, the legislators were interested in ensuring that there was some mechanism that would ensure a sale of a property. I guess I'm just redefining title restriction in sillier terms, like that the title restriction would actually run with the land and that conservation purpose would be upheld in perpetuity. The second thing that came up a lot in that conversation was concern that a grantee could pull a profit on a real estate transaction where OWEB funds it, maybe they get a bargain basement deal, it gets sold again later, and then whoever the grantee is, they've effectively pulled the profit on public funds. And the mechanism that they work through at that time that shows up at 541-960 is to have a title restriction instrument required for all of these, and to have the OWEB board effectively have a chance to review a transfer of property. And now Renee or Miriam or Diane can tell me if I've said anything inaccurate or wrong, but that's my understanding of that history, was that it wasn't so much, an undying love for conservation easements that got us, 541-960 as it is today. It was a concern that the constitutional mandate would persist. And it was a concern about what would happen if a property was transferred after that easement was put into place, either in terms of purpose or in profit. So that's just kind of a little background on what got them there and why we feel like there could be some flexibility here, theoretically, without just, you know, kind of thumbing our nose at the legislature, which, as you say, we don't like to do. We try to understand their best intent. Does Renee or Miriam or Diane want to correct anything I said? Okay. That makes me feel kind of good about myself at this point in history, I have to say. Russ, go ahead.
Okay, so couple of things, and I want to follow up on what go down a path, follow Bruce's comment. There are many partners associated with particularly the large scale land acquisitions. They could be federal, they could be a land trust, they could be a county, they could be a tribe. So you will have in many of the embedded partners a requirement for a restriction of one form or another, usually an easement associated with it. But the transfer of properties or the initial acquisition of a property to make sure that the habitat is protected may take emergency action on the part of a land trust, where the ultimate landowner may be a county, may be a tribe, but not necessarily the land trust. So having a conservation easement placed on a property that they knowingly need to, they're holding that property to make sure the habitat wasn't lost, but they're trying to cut through red tape of different government entities, partners, so the land could eventually sit into their hands. The idea of putting a conservation easement on the property may harm the ability to actually initiate those transactions. Many of the largest land acquisitions in the state of Oregon have been emergency acquisitions where somebody has gone to the bank, taken a loan, and waited 3, 4, 5 years for appropriations to come through federally or in combination with state funds to make those projects whole. So looking at a modernization process, trying to limit the amount of restrictions we put on these properties, but knowing that our goal is to protect habitat long term, we need to look at both a combination of template easements and other alternative tools that the land trust community keeps telling us to look at. Grant agreements. We have, again, there are other tools that we could use, but knowing that there is not a clear line from point A to point B, many of the conversations, for example, that are occurring right now are between communities, land trusts, and independent nations expressing an interest in getting back critical homelands. And there is a trend in that direction. I do not want to make a mistake in our modernization process that breaks the chain of opportunity to protect habitat and have appropriate buyers in the long term in control of these properties. So making sure that we have a clear picture of how these transactions occur, I think, is really important. And there is another point here. I'm not sure of the timing, but the question, it's perhaps a legal one, and somebody raised at the last meeting and we never followed through on it. Does the Constitution that was voted on in the creation of Measure 76 override existing law, or does it have to implement what overrides and what leads to what? Because there is clarity in terms of the Constitution that says that you could use other tools. And we need to make sure that we understand clearly that there's other tools available to us. And for the reasons I described, it may be beneficial to use other tools.
So Russ, I'm going to take a quick I want to say something briefly on your first question, and then I do want to give Diane a chance to either respond to your second question or defer to a little bit more research, because I think you might be pointing to Mark Webb's question from last time about whether statute in this case is inappropriately restricting the constitutional purpose and what we do if that turns out to be the case. So Before we go to Diane, I just want to reflect back. I mean, I think what I hear you saying is that you have a desire to dive deeper into the exploration of alternative tools and or potential changes to our easement language to address a number of these concerns, but it sounds like foremost, or at least significant among those, is the concern that both our tribal government partners and land trusts have raised about at the point at which, you know, somebody has you know, a property purchased under our program with a conservation easement on it and wishes to transfer ownership to a federally recognized tribe. That is, you know, acceptable to some tribes and a total non-starter to others, and there are others that fall somewhere in between because of the requirement that of a limited waiver of sovereign. Kelly said it while I was stumbling over it, of sovereign immunity. And I just want to remind and reassure folks, we are continuing to move that conversation forward in parallel with our sovereign tribal governmental partners to make sure that we understand both the problem, the depth and diversity of the problem, and also what potential solutions are acceptable, right? And so one of the things that I believe we've heard from Diane in the past is you can use a different instrument, but it may be that in order to meet 541-960, it's still going to be equally unacceptable to some tribal governments. And so that is where we need to hear directly from tribes. Sorry if I'm stealing your thunder here, Kelly. Do we need to hear directly from tribes what an acceptable solution set looks like? Because we don't want to just crack it wide open and find that no matter what we call it, actually it's complying with 541-960 that's causing problems, you know. And in that case, the solution as we understand it would have to be a legislative one. We don't get to just choose not to comply with 541-960 because, you know, it doesn't seem to make sense to us in that context. So I don't want to, you know, defer or disagree with what you've said at all, Russ. I just want to clarify that would be a legislative solution if that's where we land. Can we go to Kelly actually before we go to Diane and explore the constitutional question? Go ahead, Kelly.
Thanks, Sarah. No, I feel like you were reading my mind as you were speaking, which was great.
We've talked about it a little too. Sorry.
No, I appreciate that. And I just want to say, I appreciate Russ, you bringing up the point of looking to explore other options. I mean, that's something that the last time we spoke with Diane, we kind of had that conversation about what that might look like. But it's important to have that sideboard, Sarah, of 541-960 and just being compliant with that. Otherwise, if we can't find things that will work, we are going to have to go more of a legislative route. So I think it's really, really important that we hear from the tribes on this. And I know that OWEB, and I know because I got the letter, I know that OWEB is reaching out to tribes right now to schedule meetings with them and to talk with them about this very specific topic. And I really appreciate that because as Sarah brought up, you know, tribes aren't monoliths. So for some tribes, a limited waiver of sovereign immunity is going to be a non-starter no matter what. For other tribes, it may be more palatable. And so it really comes down to talking with the individual tribes about, you know, kind of what their risk tolerance and their level is there and figuring out ways to do it. And maybe there are tribes that have come up with really unique ways of dealing with things like this as well that we can learn from them. So I'm really excited to have those conversations, to hear what they have to say, and to explore this a little bit further on the tribal side of things as well. So just wanted to chime in and say that. And yeah, just thanks you guys for having the conversation.
Thanks for the good advice you've given us, Kelly, as tribal representative, to make sure we're doing that the right way and all the right people. Diane, did you have any comment or response to Russ's question on it has a term and Mark used it last time and I sure can't remember what it is. That thing.
Sure, Sarah. So it sounds like there was just kind of a larger question. about whether the existing either statutes or I think Mark's question was in regards to the rules, if whether they would be consistent with the directive in the Constitution and kind of what would happen if they weren't. And you just looked at the pyramid of you know, how law controls, and so absolutely for the board to enact administrative rules, they have to be consistent with the constitutional directive and statutes. I think the specific concern here was about the language in Measure 76 that is incorporated into the Constitution on acquisitions, that says OWEB will acquire from willing owners interests in land or water that will protect or restore native fish or wildlife habitats, which interests may include but are not limited to, and then it says fee interests, conservation easements, or leases. And I think the concern is, well, if we don't have a lease program, are our rules consistent? I mean, and so at the outset, I would say that language is permissive, right? It says may include. So I think, you know, if we were getting into an analysis of that, first off, I don't think the board would argue its rules are inconsistent with its authorities. But if in revisiting, if there was a concern about that and you wanted to make it align better, I think, you know, you could adjust that. But I think that just the nature of that language itself gives the board the authority to have options there. And it seems that was the voters' intent, was to give the board options, and the board can decide to use some or more. So that's maybe getting into the details of that question. But if the question was just the higher level, you know, what controls, it's certainly, we're always going back to that constitutional language. That's what has to be the driving force.
So Diane, can I sum up for the purposes of understanding and see how I do? And then we can see if we have any other comments on this before we go to Bruce's question. It sounds like because that language in the Constitution is permissive, we may do all of those things. We don't have to do all of those things. And if something in statute or rule precludes some of those options, it's not seen as being necessarily in direct conflict. Is that right? Or sort of inappropriately constraining our
right, the board's
operating space.
Yes, the board's taking that directive and it's implementing it. And in doing that, you know, part of the reason why boards or commissions have to develop rules is that the statutes or Constitution is often not directive enough to actually run a program. They're just, you know, providing the high level details and then asking the board or commission to go ahead and implement it. So the function of that is always going to be some level of narrowing, you know, when you're implementing it. But does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Russ, it sounds like you could call up Richard and say he should have put a shall there. And other than that, we probably have a pretty normal and acceptable cascading of policy arrangement here. Any other questions or comments on that topic before I pulled up the slide, which makes it hard to see. Should we go to Bruce?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks,
Russ, I'm going to forcibly lower your hand.
Oh,
just
no,
so
I'm
you can
sorry.
raise
Yeah,
it again later.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. This is a question for Diane. I recognize that we might want to look at other instruments, but at the same time, look at modifying RCEs to meet all the different requirements we've been talking about. So specifically a question for Diane, can we legally include language within RCEs that gives flexibility to the OWEB board to modify restrictions within an existing CE?
So Bruce, let me see if I understand. Are you talking about just a general condition that so our current template, I believe, has a modification provision that provides some process for a modification of a CE. But, you know, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of drafting a conservation easement. There's really not a lot that, you know, has to be included legally. It's more through practice over time, what organizations have determined, you know, is necessary. So, do you mean like a reopener clause or?
Well, I was thinking about Russ's questions and the way the timelines of the various acquisitions transpire and changes, different things, and it seemed to me in my time on the board that the board has generally been sympathetic and sensitive to partners coming back and saying, this has changed, and can we do this? And where the board has had, has A, ended up agreeing with that, and then B, having the ability to make the changes, they've generally been very supportive of our partners going forward. And as Russ talks about how we can do that, I was just wondering if there was language to anticipate the potential that in virtually every C that somebody will come back and say, we need this. The board then has to make a decision. Is that consistent with our policy, our mission, our requirements? And if so, can we do it? So that was my question on the language within the CE to anticipate that these can happen in any particular CE and giving the board as much flexibility because I have this incredible trust for future boards.
Yes,
So
well,
it sounds like any changes we made obviously wouldn't be like immediately retroactive to past agreements. But I'm reminded of you saying in another context at one point that an easement is a contract, right?
Yep.
So we can go back and, you know, within the terms of the existing easement, go back and work through a mutually agreeable amendment to that contract. We have language in our easements that gives us a little bit of a clue how to do that.
Correct. And in the context of a specific transaction, you know, you could provide additional detail about how that process would go, or, you know, if there was something like Russ described, where there was, you know, the need to meet LWeb's legal requirements, but to move very quickly and to do like a higher level easement that was going to be kind of a bridge easement or something, you know, there's flexibility there if the board is interested in entertaining it.
So could I follow up, Sarah?
Of course.
Okay. So what I heard was we can do that. But what I hear from partners is they look at our CEs as being monolithic. They look at it as being slightly fixed, or as being fixed. And may shy away from them. So my question on language within there, talking about the potential for the appropriate reasons that we have the flexibility that it has to come back to the board. It has to come back and be approved by the board, but that is an avenue that can be taken. And with whether that would send our partners, potential grantees, reassurance that they weren't looking at this and getting locked into something that might become onerous in the future. That's all.
Yeah, I think it's a helpful thing to explore. Appreciate the clarification. And I'll note we do, and I know this came up at a previous board meeting, have a request actually not only for an amendment, but for an actual release of an easement on the table and haven't brought that back to the board, in part because we're kind of communicating with the grantee and wanting to see where this conversation goes. And let us know that that's not in a big rush, and they're interested to kind of see the continuation of the committee conversation. So that's been on hold now for a couple of meetings, just because we seem to be heading in a relevant direction in these committee conversations. But that, I don't know how much amendment a history of easement amendments has gone on before my time, but that's the only amendment, and it would be a first time release if the board approved it. So maybe Renee or Miriam in the future could give us a little overview of what the frequency and type of amendments has been in the past, and whether we can make that either easier or more apparent that it's possible. Dan, I feel awkward calling on you guys. I'm not used to doing this, but you asked me to. I keep reminding myself this.
So, kind of a follow-up on the conservation. I think Bruce, well, I shouldn't even talk about Bruce's question because his is his question. I'll just say kind of what I feel like I heard was concern not with a conservation easement in and of itself, but concern about the comprehensiveness of the CE and the amount of sort of additional conditions that we build into them that have to do with desired future conditions and restoration and everything else. And I could be wrong on that, but I felt like for me, what I was hearing was OWEB's got a lot of, things that we're trying to do. Whereas what I heard from some of the panel members was like, hey man, we just want to be opportunistic. This property comes up, we want to lock it in, and we can deal with the sort of restoration components and increasing the conservation value, later, sort of, almost, right? And so what I guess my question is there a path forward that we don't have to stuff everything into a CE? I mean, could the CE be very limited for the protection of the land, and then we use some other mechanism to include like all that other stuff? And I'm sorry, I can't articulate what all that other stuff was, but people were like, there's all this other stuff, all this risk prevention stuff that gets stuffed in there, all this desired future condition stuff. And it sounds like it's just too much baggage. As somebody who just traveled in a very little thing, it's like we're trying to stuff too much into the conservation easement. Can we just keep it very narrow and deal with all those headache things in some other separate, thing?
You don't want to put your umbrella in your backpack. In other words,
yeah,
all that stuff in there. So Diane,
Yeah.
you mentioned that it can be pretty darn basic. I want to give you a chance to respond, and then I wonder if Renee can actually help us imagine what that might look like in more detail.
Sure. So, the statute that enables conservation easements doesn't, it doesn't provide a lot in terms of what must be in them. And so we talked about this before, that that's driven by just the terms are driven by the interest in enforcing it and making sure that the elements that the board is trying to ensure that are described in the Constitution are maintained. And so I think that the agency could certainly take a look at the template and, have a directive from the board to try to reduce the amount of terms and, take a look at it with that lens. I don't know off the top of my, I think if that was the directive, think how we could strip down the easement. That'd be something that more the agency would work with our real property section at DOJ on, and that could be something that could collaboratively be worked through. In terms of like put this other stuff somewhere, I don't know, like if we mean more of like the like management plans, that sort of thing. I mean, there is already construct where some stuff is elsewhere, and I think that's differed over the years a bit, and varies in some of the other OWEB programs, but you know, I think there's, I guess the short answer is I think there is a lot of flexibility there that hasn't, I don't know that, I guess maybe Renee or Miriam could speak to what the extent to which the agency's done that exercise at all, or thought about, you know, things that could be removed.
Thanks, Diane. I would say we've not yet thought about things that can be removed because we're having exactly this committee and subsequently board conversation. What we need to open up these topics for discussion and have clear direction from the board around what is your risk tolerance, what is your inclination to distribute risk between the agency and our partners, because we really hope that this modernization process will stick, will finally solve some of these issues. So Sarah, I'm going to disappoint you by saying I can't say what I would envision this looking like. I think part of the follow-up, and Dan, that's perfect tee up for the December conversation. So around the CE is clearly of concern to many of our grantees. I don't think that that is disconnected from some of the content and implementation. So when you have things like a baseline conditions document that is connected to, referenced in a conservation easement, when you have a management plan that similarly is kind of connected to, referenced in an easement document, we really need to get clear on, is it the easement or is it kind of these connections we've created to what is a very extensive management planning process? There's a 5-year updating plan to that. And so by saying this, I don't want to minimize any perceived or real concerns about the easement. We need to have that conversation, but I think we have to peel back some more layers of the onion to understand, are we solving the right problem? Is it that we ask folks about defining their conservation values? That goes back to content in the grant application. And by saying habitat needs to be significant enough to kind of meet the bar of this program, are we creating this almost intractable situation where folks feel as though it all is very burdensome, because we go from desired or rather significant habitat through an easement process that has conservation values, it has a baseline, it has a management plan. So just trying to understand, if we pare down the easement document, but we haven't talked about things like a management planning process, is there still going to be concern and I guess just kind of frustration about how this program is structured. So I think we have to tease some of that apart, and December will help. And I think just doing some legwork to get a better handle from grantees between now and December. Tell us more about like where those key sticking points are, instead of, you know, just kind of, we've identified categories, not specific examples, until we started getting to some of the case studies in the last meeting.
And if I may, just one follow-up, sorry, Mark, on that thread is because some, like the constitutional language, if I read it correctly, says protect or restore, right? And I feel like what OWEB is saying is it's all of the above. And I feel like some of the land trusts were saying, hey, we got to move fast to protect and restore later. And so it seems like we could do something to protect and something else to restore. And that's all. I'll just leave it at that.
You are so ready for our December committee meeting, Dan. I mean, it's just like the perfect setup. And I just want to be clear. I think Renee hinted at this and really uncovered the crux. We did not expect you guys to be able to do an up-down vote on this and go to the full board and be like, we should absolutely either keep using easements or expand the set of instruments. But we had to really chew through this before we got to a conversation on future conditions and significant habitat, which Dan just described perfectly, and recreational and cultural use and access. Knowing that those come through the mechanism of a conservation easement right now, it's like we have only begun to unpeel the onion, right? And so it's going to get a little weepier maybe through the next couple of meetings here, but I think that's what we're trying to set you up, is to see those layers of like what is connected, what's either within our easement document or what's or agreement, or what's tied to that folks might be experiencing some consternation with, which frankly, if they're frustrated with the way we do that through an easement, we could probably hook that to a deed restriction and make it just as frustrating as we're currently making it with a conservation easement. If it turns out that it's the things hooked to the engine and not the engine itself that is causing a fair amount of the frustration. So that's what we're trying to uncover. And also, I think Renee hinted here at a commitment that we're going to not only continue to have the land trust and tribal governments and other potential grantees come and talk about this directly in more detail in future meetings, but we're also meeting with them in between to try to bring as much context and detail and case studies as we can to future conversations. So we'll keep unpeeling layers as we go. Mark?
So I don't have questions right here. I'm just going to share my view. Listening.
Great. This is the place to do it.
So one, I am frustrated that we continue to talk about risk and we haven't defined it. Does it mean likelihoods? Does it mean the cost or the consequence of something going wrong? We continue to conflate those, I think. Related, I have a lot of tolerance for risk as I understand what we're talking about in terms of habitat acquisition, taking chances that it might go sideways. It's well worth it. That tells me that the risk matrix that y'all provided early on, both theoretically, it makes a lot of sense. Those are things that could go wrong. Either there's a higher or a lower probability that they'll go wrong, or if they go wrong, there's a higher cost or a lower cost associated with them. We're not clear about that. The land trust communities similarly conflate those. For me, my takeaway from the last meeting and talking to conservation or the land trust committee, the conservation easement they bellyache about, understandably, but that is not the issue. It's the application process. It's too onerous, it's inconsistent, and they really can't count on it being, I mean, the expectations aren't there. My one question for us is, on the one hand, the guidance and the program materials is incredible. Whoever put that together, either the staffer or the group of staff who did that, fantastic. It's an elegant piece of work. On the other hand, I think we're asking too much of people to provide that. What I would be interested in is if we have a title report and insurance, we have an environmental site review, we have a credible appraisal, a willing seller, we know however, that it's ecologically important landscape. What more do we need to ask of our applicants than that information to make a decision on? That seems to me really, really straightforward, very simple. The expectations are out there. I would be interested in knowing what that would look like.
We won't try to answer that now, Mark, but I think we can bring some more back on that in a future meeting, if that's okay. And appreciate you sharing your perspectives. I think one of the questions we had in the prompts is, are you guys heading towards something we should report back to the full board in one of our upcoming meetings? And that could just be, we see, here are the elements that we see in this conversation. It could be more educational and sort of pro and con, or here are routes to explore or something like that. But getting that sort of temperature read from individual members is really helpful. Russ?
Thank you. Mark, I really appreciate your comments, and it sounds like you've done a lot of work to reach out and really get to the heart of the issues with the land trust community. So I'm grateful for that. What I want to follow up on your comments because I think they're really astute. Part of this is we have a very committed staff, and we're fortunate to have a program where we have highly experienced people in the land trust community that come with certifications and risk avoidance techniques to be able to work with us. And I think that moving forward in a modernization process, there needs to be an acknowledgement that you have certified land trusts. And if you are a certified land trust, you could jump from A to get to Z by perhaps moving to the head of the line and not having to do as much paperwork, that there's a trust relationship, understanding that the risk is minimized because of who you are and what you are doing. And somehow to be able to address that during the modernization process, I think is going to be critical. But the terms of the grant agreements, the acknowledgement that they have capacity and due diligence should have already been, parked in the back, and that confirm that basically you are a accredited Gold Star entity, and therefore you don't have to do certain things, that you are an expedited partner in some manner. And what we could legally do to help move through that process, I think, is all part of this conversation. And but I think that we need to have further conversations with the land trust community to understand explicitly what is causing the consternation, and what is causing the sense of frustration and excess on their part that got us to a point of virtually zero acquisitions. I am really grateful that we're now moving towards 9 and more, but I really want to make sure that we get to the core of the issue, and I think this has to do with trust and risk.
It's an interesting way of putting it. Thanks, Russ. I think we're continuing to add your comments here to our board member temperature, so this is really helpful. Bruce?
Thanks, Sarah. I have 2 quick things. The first one, as Dan was speaking, and then followed up by what Mark was saying, I think we have to keep reminding ourselves that this is a competitive program, and that if we make it so the template so simple that many people qualify on a level plan, we have to have criteria to make decisions. When we had more money than we had applicants, not an issue. But we have 9, we might hopefully we're going to have more. So at some point, we're going to have to make decisions. The board will make decisions prompted by the staff that are ranking these. So we have to have some method of ranking. Now, how that applies, how that is in the application, how do we get that information so we can rank, at the same time streamlining the process. I think we just need to keep the idea that this is a competitive environment in the back of our minds going forward. And secondly, responding to Mark's good questions about risk, I recently was reading a report from a board of trustees from a small college in the Midwest, and they are involved in making investments to protect and enhance a large endowment. And they developed a tool, and they called it a risk assessment grid. And the purpose of that was just to, as it says, to assess risk on investment. And they actually only had 3 items on it. Mark, you'll like these. 1, likelihood. 2, severity. And 3, impact. So as the board makes decisions moving forward on that risk that we talked about, the risk document we put together so far, it would be great to have likelihood, severity, and impact given to the board to make their decisions. So it's a fairly simple grid. I floated it by Renee before I brought it to the committee so that I wouldn't blindside her, but I think it's a great tool that we could use internally. Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce. I was looking to see if Renee wanted to comment on that, but I didn't see her unmute. So Renee, let us know if you want to follow up any. I think one thing that made me think, Bruce, is, I mean, we do have, as with OWEB's other programs, evaluation criteria and administrative rule that are used for this program. And with, you know, it's funny how you describe that, because we were going through the process for many of our other program types right now of doing exactly what you described. It's like, how much can we simplify the application given the evaluation criteria that we have in rule? And knowing that a review team, which to my knowledge we haven't used at least recently in land acquisitions, but for other grant types, an external review team has to sit down with the information in the application and the evaluation criteria and figure out how to, you know, prioritize projects just in the way you described, Bruce. And so I think that was really, it's funny that that was highlighted, I think, in Colt's written comments, the, you know, can you learn from the restoration programs here? And I think what you just described, or from the other open solicitation grant types here, and what you described is, you know, an area where there's been a little less parallel between restoration or other open solicitation grant types and land acquisitions, at least in recent times. So that, I think that's something we could bring to a future meeting to sort of daylight those evaluation criteria as we're getting to a more detailed, to Mark's point, what's actually going into that application process. Can we do the sort of ask people for the bare minimum in order to effectively evaluate and compare competitive applications in a competitive environment, but not ask for more information than we need to actually make that decision? And, you know, organizational capacity and project likelihood of success are, you know, some of the factors, at least in some of our programs rules, that connect directly to some of the stuff we've been talking about here, and that review teams talk about a lot. Friends, I've got the rest of the afternoon, but in this meeting, technically, we have just over 10 minutes. I think I want to make sure members are getting what they want and need out of this conversation. And if so, I'm happy. But give it some thought and see if you want to get yourself in the queue here to share any additional reflections or questions. Mark?
I like that, Bruce. That's simple and elegant. I think that'd be great. What I wanted to share as an example or an analog, Blue Mountain Forest Partners has worked with the Forest Service for a lot of years. Originally, it was around planning projects, designing projects, and then we've slowly transitioned into engaging around implementation. So making sure that the prescriptions captured what we in the Forest Service agreed to, that the contract language, which is more of a legal document than the prescriptions, captured it as well as they could, given the Forest Service's legal obligations in a contract environment, and then working with the contracting officer and the contracting officer's representatives. We found it really beneficial to have BMFP members who are in the timber industry or in the service sector, part of that industry, working with the Forest Service really both ways, so that the Forest Service could understand from a contractor's perspective where the hiccups were, where things could be made better, and so on. And also from the contractor's side, where no matter how much better you can make it for us, the Forest Service has certain legal obligations, federal acquisition requirements, and so on. So I would just follow up or encourage y'all, I forget if it was Dan or Russ, I just think it'd be great to have the land trust community, just because they're the ones we primarily deal with, not the only ones. So we deal with them a lot, just to have them share with us things that work well, even if not all of those are things that we as a committee or a board or even legally could go with. I just think it's really important to bring those practitioners from both the agency side and the land trust side together to talk about that.
That's great. That's a helpful stream to run down. Thank you, Mark. Dan?
Yeah, it's not, well, the one question I have is that I think I heard when there are multiple funding partners in some of these acquisition programs, things get a little complicated between the differences from the different funding agencies. Like everybody's got their own something that maintains accountability for whatever it is they're after. And to the extent that like there's a common set of funders, like, you know, whether in this area it's, you know, Bonneville, for example, or who those other big funders are. I didn't know if there was opportunity to kind of work with those other funders to try to fix some of those problems that arise because of inconsistencies in each funder's kind of accountability stream, for lack of a better way to explain that. So that's just a question I don't really expect an answer to now. And then for your point, Sarah, like, is everybody getting what they need out of this conversation? It's been helpful to me because I feel like it's just created some more space, and I think we're going to continue to need more space to chat. But for the other, as a co-chair, as a spokesperson to some extent for this full committee, I'm also like struggling with, like Mark said a moment ago, like, hey, I'm a high risk guy, you know, and I happen to be a high risk guy too, but you know, maybe Russ isn't, or maybe Bruce isn't. And so I don't know, like, does this committee need to sort of, I'm not, there was a document shared last time that laid out our responsibility as a committee, and it made me feel like we needed to ultimately at some point in time do some work to bring a recommendation to the board. And maybe I'm wrong there, and I know OWEB staff will be mainly doing that and helping us with that, but I just wanted to throw that out there for any kind of reaction from my other committee members here.
Well, your committee members are thinking, Dan, the good news is that, yeah, the bad news is we will need a recommendation out of you at some point. The good news is it can be quite complex. It doesn't have to be a consensus opinion or a vote. And also you don't have to do it before next week's meeting. So at next week's meeting, we're asking the co-chairs of the committee to make a pretty brief report, and then Renee and Miriam and I and others have been working on a presentation, and we're hoping just to give folks a glimpse into these conversations. We'll say enough to get them, you know, sort of the core basics. It'll feel really light compared to these conversations, of course, and then you guys are welcome to disagree with us or add your own layers. But I think, you know, we did have a hope that we might have a sense by the January meeting whether it made sense to initiate rulemaking or not. If we're still making good progress and we're not there yet, that's totally fine. But I think continuing to sort of increasingly bring the full board into these conversations is probably pretty wise, because I don't know that you guys have an enormous amount of diversity and risk tolerance amongst you, but I think the full board might. So I think starting to get a broader set of perspectives, and we'll have new members coming in January, and they won't know what we're talking about at all on some of this stuff. So we can stay in educational mode and just give folks that glimpse into the conversation for a while here. And we'll start drafting you towards a recommendation when the time is ripe. So don't lose sleep over it anyway. With 5 minutes left, Kelly, I hate to pick on you. You've been very quiet. I just want to remind you that you're not a co-chair in this meeting, so you are welcome to participate if you wish, but of course you don't have to. You did already, but just want to give you a chance.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm definitely not a wallflower, but I did want to hear what the other members had to say about things. I apologize for missing the last meeting. So I feel like I'm playing a little bit of catch up here, and to be honest, I agree with Dan. I feel like today's meeting was good to create some more space, kind of dial in on a couple of the questions that we had. And really the questions that other folks asked, I feel like everybody just raised their hands before I did and had a chance to. And I think it was good to get that clarification. I mean, I think we need to have more conversations. I think December and what comes out of the conversations with the tribes is going to be incredibly helpful for the process moving forward as well. So I think right now, I feel like we're really in more of an information gathering phase in order to kind of put the pieces together at a later date to come up with that recommendation. And so I'm kind of just processing everything, digesting everything, thinking of additional questions, but I really want to hear what folks have to say in December and from our tribal partners. And I feel like we should just put it out there to Diane now that she should probably just put these meetings on our calendar moving forward, that we're going to need her here with us probably for a lot of these conversations. And really appreciate your help, kind of navigating through this as well. So
Agreed. Thanks, Kelly. Russ and then Mark, and then we probably better adjourn. We do tend to try to end these things on time, I guess, pretty consistently. Russ?
So reflecting on the last meeting, I remember one of the conversation points of the land trust community, that one of them, and it gets to Bruce's comment, one of the most critical elements of this is to ensure that whatever we do not lose critical habitat. And to be able to, we are in a very unique period of time where we now have, through one of our state partners, ODFW, completing, Mark Labhart and I were emailing back and forth. Sarah, you were copied, and ODFW has the ability to share with us now the new conservation strategy of the state, how we unify our work and expedite priority work for and guidance to the land trust community and guidance to all of our partners about making sure that we do not lose critical habitat in the face of climate change. We're going to have new tools and new information available to us. So again, modernization, focus. We're in a very unique period of time to be able to work with our other state agencies to really work in unison towards the pressures that we're facing because of climate change.
Yeah, agreed, Russ. Thanks for that note. And also, we are hoping to have ODFW leadership folks join us either January or April. We weren't able to make it happen for this meeting, but to talk about the new version of the State Wildlife Action Plan. Mark, you want the last word? No pressure.
No, just a question. I just wonder if the committee still feels like we need to focus on conservation easements per se, or if we can start to divert our attention elsewhere.
Can I provide a friendly amendment to that question, Mark, which is we will come back to this. Are you ready to dive into future conditions and significant habitat and tribal perspectives at the December meeting, knowing that we will continue to revisit the question of whether conservation easements are the best or the sole instrument for that? So we're gonna kind of keep moving.
I'll be grumpy about it.
Okay, good. You're not. You want to spend another 3 hours on this topic before we
Not
move
on
on to the next
conservation
one?
easements. I don't think that's what the land trust we're talking about. I don't think the statute supports anything else. And so to the extent we spend our time on that, we're losing valuable time on other stuff. That's it.
So noted. I change my mind every 2 or 3 times we talk about this in one direction or another. So I appreciate you getting grumpy and steering us in a particular direction. Renee shared highlights earlier in the meeting from December. We do anticipate having a tribal panel. We have invited our tribal government colleagues to include not only easements, but any and all of the topics brought up in our earlier interviews and our memos and discussions, or sort of general feedback related to the program. So that'll be probably more of a blend. And then with time that we have remaining, we're working with our partners at Colt to, rather than start right back up with a land trust panel, to sort of collect some information between the meetings, come to you with sort of a presentation on the key issues and significant habitat and future conditions. And boy, will you look back fondly on when you knew as little about conservation easements as you do today. or land protection in general, and restoration and stewardship. It just gets smushier and smushier from here on out. It's going to be a lot of fun. Bruce?
Sarah, you remind me of Alice in Wonderland, who
I
said,
do like going down rabbit holes.
Who-
There's no doubt about that.
who said, I knew who I was when I got up this morning, but I've changed several times since then. So, so thank you. I'll miss this committee. I'll miss your smiling faces. Thanks.
Bruce, we have so enjoyed having your thoughtful participation and engagement on this committee. I cannot believe we are losing you a mere year into this conversation, and I really would love it if you come back and see us again as a member of the public. And if not, we should stay in touch and have coffee. Or, you know, you can find other stuff to do with your life if you don't want to spend that time with us. But we'll miss you a lot, for sure.
Well, why don't you all come to Astoria next week and see me?
Okay, we'll come to Astoria next week and see all of us that can. We look forward to it. And I believe I was promised some clam digs or something like that. So we'll see how that goes. Thanks so much, you guys. Really great conversation. Thanks for taking the extra time.
Thank you. See you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.